Others will be joining us shortly. Let me just put the agenda up just to keep us sort of reminded where we are. So what this is the updated version of what we've already agreed on, which are these 4 items from the white paper. And then hopefully today we can look at the remaining recommendations from the white paper. Sorry. And the things from the comp plan and other areas we've identified, and then get to the most important thing, which is the next steps, which is where I'm going to ask Shannon to take over at that point, because she's been thinking about this and has much better ideas about it than I do. So why don't we just jump right in? The 5th and final thing from the white paper, the recommendation is in the student center catalyst areas, establish requirements for developers to put infrastructure in place alongside development. So in the white paper, there were, I don't know how many, 7 or 8 catalyst areas that were recommended. And these would be areas throughout the city with overlays that have development moving in certain directions and not in others. And so this is the request that in those areas, we include requirements related to transportation, and we can be more specific, that has to be part of the developer's plan for those areas. And that's this one right here. So I'll turn it over to you again for discussion. If this is something we support, where we want to go from here. Any thoughts at all? Okay, so I'll take that as we're okay with this. If ever anyone, any comments at all?
I think this idea makes sense.
Okay. All right. Other thoughts before I just sort of take this as a good one? All right, good. If you have other thoughts, let me know. But so I will include then in the report I give to council that we support, and again, this needs more fleshing out, all 5 of the recommendations from the white paper as part of what we think need to be included in the transportation, traffic, and transit component. All right. And then the next part of this was in the comp plan, where they had the 100+ list of objectives and strategies. They had these 3 as their primary priorities. So the continuing to add and improve bike and pedestrian pathways, continue to support mass transit, and explore providing transit in traditional areas. And I think the first 2 of these, honestly, we've already included in our thoughts up above and beyond. So I think we are supporting those. The only one that was not part of the white paper was this last one, providing transit in traditional neighborhoods. So we had talked about that. I wanted to have a little conversation about, is this a priority for our committee to move forward or not? And we talked a lot about this. So this would not be the 93, 123. This would be transit, and now that includes non-motorized transit in traditional neighborhoods. So thoughts on that particular one, if we want to support that, what that means to us. And this is a nice addition, or important addition, I think.
Personally, I think that when the word transit for me tends to call to mind the cat bus system. So that throws me off a bit. But when you said other forms of non-motorized, I think looking at how to connect traditional neighborhoods by pedestrian and bike infrastructure makes a ton of sense. I think in terms of putting a lot of time into exploring how the cat bus can serve those neighborhoods, I think it probably just depends on how practical that is, how densely developed those neighborhoods are, and if it's efficient for the system to serve those neighborhoods. But it would be great if it was.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if the thought, and Brad, you might want to clarify a little bit, from the comprehensive plan people were necessarily cat buses in neighborhoods. Brad, do you remember what you guys were thinking in that?
Well, we wanted bus shelters kind of on the outskirts of some of these communities. I'd have to dig back into the rough draft document, but I know that was talked about, adding more bus shelters, more connectivity from these communities.
Okay.
Fran,
Yeah,
Fran,
Bill. Yeah.
I think identifying some of the key routes through those communities, not every street of obviously things like Berkeley, Issaquena. I'm sorry, I don't know the name of some of the roads in the downtown area that might be considered as this. But those are the type things I think would be appropriate, and have a bus that runs through those with shelters as on the outside of it would be appropriate.
Okay. Good. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. Other thoughts on that one?
And
Yeah, D. Yep.
there are not many neighborhood streets that could take the buses. I think we need to use the language of to serve, or at the edges of, something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yesterday we had a meeting with Chris Shiver, the city engineer, and I talked about narrower lanes, narrower roads and neighborhoods is one way to slow traffic down. And he mentioned sort of like not necessarily buses, but that's complicated by things like the garbage trucks and the people that pick up all the brush kind of things, that it's, they need wider lanes than 9 feet or whatever it was. And certainly buses, I think, would complicate that even more. So in some ways would be opposing approaches that probably would not be congruent with each other, right? Because if you can have buses, that affects all kinds of car, automotive, bus traffic, bike traffic in those neighborhoods. So I don't know, we're talking buses in neighborhoods. I like the idea, though, of making sure neighborhoods are aware of and have some kind of connection to bus stops and bus shelters, which is, I think, a different thing. Brad, you have a hand up?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I see a hand. All right. Other thoughts on that one?
One of the problems is we have such hilly climate here. I mean, hilly land here that it's hard to get a bus up and down some of those hills.
Okay, yeah. So just sort of to think that through, then what does that mean, providing transit in traditional neighborhoods? And I mean, back to sort of, I think, Lisa's comment, what would we be talking about?
Could we use the language instead of transit? Could we say explore providing and improving bike and pedestrian pathways in traditional neighborhoods? Could we just broaden and add to that, and providing connectivity to cat bus routes via stops and shelters?
I'm writing this down, Lisa. Okay,
That was Shannon, I believe.
and I'm sorry.
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
I agree
Okay.
with that. That'd be great. More connectivity from the communities, pathways to potentially more bus shelters on some of these major routes. Not major routes, but like, you got the state route 93 and Issaquena, Old Cherry, 130, Cochran Road. And then the loop around the north side up there where the Public Works Department is, Creekwood,
Okay.
Abel and whatnot. Yep.
Okay. And that's a little bit like if you drop down on the display to number 2, where we talked a lot about this, upgrading pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure on connector roads and in residential areas. Shannon, does that kind of capture the same thought that you just had?
I think that's the same thing. I think if we wanted to add a recommendation, that would be one that encompassed both the priority from the comp plan and what we discussed.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I'll try to integrate those two things. All right, other comments on the exploring providing transit. We'll make the change in traditional neighborhoods that you would see as part of that. Anyone at all? All right, good. So I will add that, well, I will tweak that and add that to our list, right? And then the last part of this, and again, this is just sort of trying to start to get some priorities from this group, is I went back through all of the notes I had taken and all the meeting notes I had and what I recalled. And I really thought that these were the 4 major themes. Remember when we were creating kind of the ideal transit traffic transportation system, I thought these were the 4 major themes that we talked about that weren't in other places. So we talked a lot about neighborhood safety. We talked about the upgrading the pedestrian bicycle infrastructure, and we've already just dealt with that. We talked about developing transportation nodes, but again, that might be a strategy, not a priority. And then we talked about creating a culture of alternative transportation. One I don't have there that we talked about a lot was working and having stronger partnerships with Clemson University, but I think that kind of transcends all of this. But do those capture our thoughts? And then have others, or do you have other ideas about what we want to specifically have as priorities, not specific strategies, but these larger issues? We had so many notes, and I just tried to capture it by theme, but I'm sure I missed things. So other more general priority type things that we would want to recommend. Lisa?
I'm not sure if this fits exactly into this list of things, but I just want to make sure to voice it that we have talked about it, but I just want to make sure that as we move forward with this effort, the land use decisions are interconnected with the transportation investments.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. I'll tell you something interesting as you said that, and this was sort of a good point. Yesterday when Chris Shiver was talking to us, one thing, the message, the whole point of it, what streets were we going to pave next? Because our street infrastructure needs a whole lot of work. But one of the things that I talked about, and he said they'd already considered, is that as they repave streets or rethink about streets, that they do think about bike lanes and pedestrian safety as part of that whole process. Whether that means we're going to have narrower streets and there will be bike lanes or whatever. So I think, Lisa, as you said, he already was thinking about sort of how do we connect all these ideas, so as we replace concrete or replace roadway, not forgetting about maybe we need to remember these kind of issues and priorities that are coming up in the next plan. And he'd already thought about that. He already was on top of that, and the notion that, that's a consideration when we think about these things. But I think we should definitely add that, though, as one of our priorities. That's good. Shannon?
Yes, I wanted to talk about the idea of neighborhood safety. Could we put some boundaries on that? Maybe make the priority something like make our neighborhoods safe to walk and bike in, just to make it a little bit more specific.
Yeah. Yep, we can do that. In fact, because obviously safety has other areas which are all important, but from this committee's perspective, maybe not. I'll give you another really good example. I may have told this last week that the council members got an email from someone who was concerned about traffic on I think it was Karen Drive, one of the roads that a lot of people drive on to get to school, and traffic and speed, and we made Chief Compost aware of that, and he met with the people who had issues with it. And I think he's adding some stop signs, I believe, in those neighborhoods. He may be doing something about speed limits also. So people are already starting to think about that. But we'll specify this in terms of sort of this notion of pedestrian walking and bike safety. I like that. Yeah, all right. Other edits or other things you would like to add to that? And let me just put that back up here so we can all see it. Yeah. Anything else? This is sort of the culmination of phase one of this. So anything else that was a big issue? Shannon?
Under create a culture of alternative transportation, could we put some sub items under there?
Absolutely. I struggle with this one, so sure, let's get them. That's good.
All right, so for example, with Green Crescent Trail, we've talked about having open streets events, or having some sort of events that are designed for people to not take their car there. So biking and walking centered events.
Yeah.
Is one, I think, very specific example. I don't know, Lisa, you might have some other ideas.
I think that the thing that Chad's working on regarding the wayfinding signage and other pedestrian cues like that, that just, really kind of highlight how to get around without a car, help create that culture.
So those are sort of specific implementations, but I'm almost thinking the whole signage issue might be a complete independent priority that can stand on its own. Because that's sort of culture, transportation, but that's a lot of other things. So I think signage is important enough to set it aside. Yeah. And that had come up in a lot of conversations. So, okay. Other thoughts on those, or adding or expanding? Again, this is the what question, not so much the how yet.
I see people in go-karts, not go-karts, golf carts in town. Are they allowed on the streets, or are the people violating the law when they do that?
Ainsley, I've wondered the same thing. I don't know. Does anyone have any idea?
Yeah, Fran, I
Yes.
can tell you.
Go ahead.
Just briefly, I was thinking the exact same thing when Inslee came up with that. I have a golf cart, and we ride it around a lot, and we visit my brother who lives in a community where they use golf carts a lot to ride around the community. And I was thinking if we had a way of allowing people to get round on golf carts, because you're seeing more and more and more of them. But you can ride a golf cart as long as it's what we call street legal on any street that's 35 miles per hour or lower. You can ride it on the street. You can cross a street that's 45 or more, but you can't drive it on that street. So that's the basic rules for using a golf cart. And they do have to, well, they have lights on them and turn signals and that type of stuff to be what they call street legal to ride around on. That's all the information I have on that.
Okay. Brad, did you have more?
No, Mr. Caraway answered that for me. That was spot on. You also got to have a permit, and some rumors say you got to have insurance too if you get on the road. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I've got permit and insurance on mine, but I've never been stopped for it on a game day and whatnot. I've been wanting to pursue golf cart friendly neighborhoods or pathways or whatnot too, but I just thought that's so far out that'll never happen. And I guess we got to be careful too about letting golf carts just freely roam around, especially on 123, because I have seen them on 123. They'll ride the sidewalk to go down to the Chick-fil-A. So that's illegal. You can't do that. But I guess it's more of an enforcement thing from the police department.
Yes, you technically you can't ride on the sidewalk, but people do in non-busy areas. You do, as Brad said, you do have to have your cart has to be registered with the state, and you supposedly have insurance on it too, which is not that much money at all. You get insurance on it.
Okay. So we'll think about golf carts too. D?
Am I on? Can I be heard? Or am I muted?
You're
You're
good.
Here,
good.
UD.
You're good.
The golf cart thing doesn't involve me, but I do think the city ought to make it clear what the rules are and what the rules are not. I don't think that's happened. Safe neighborhoods. There are some places where the city could look into closing some streets. If you look at a neighborhood that's a cul-de-sac, there's one way in, one way out, you will find a safer neighborhood and you will find higher property values. And there are some places in this town that would benefit from that.
Yeah.
I can add to that. Years ago, Monaco, I live in Monaco, and Monaco had a through street. Princess Grace went from Cambridge all the way to Berkeley. And back then our homeowners association got that street closed off of Cambridge Drive. And that has made a world of difference, because I can't imagine now if Princess Grace was still a through street, the traffic that would be coming, from apartments and all that way cutting through would be terrible. But our neighborhood, we feel, is very, very safe because of that. And back then, the lady that was in charge of our homeowners association really pushed for that, and that was a great thing for the city to do. And it's made a big difference to do it. So yes, I agree with that entirely.
Yeah. Well, that's good strategy to consider also. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. All right. Other thoughts about those priorities? That's good. Lisa?
Just a quick comment. I totally understand what's being discussed regarding, cut through traffic and when it is just going at a speed that's makes it dangerous for the people in those neighborhoods. I think the struggle, of course, is that if you don't have those connectors, you're reducing your connectivity. So it's a little bit of a balance there, because if every neighborhood only offloads onto major roads like 93 or 123 or even like the Berkeley, and there's no other way to get there, you're just reducing your options in terms of routes, and everybody's got to use the same roads. So it's a struggle, because I do totally recognize what's being talked about with cut through traffic.
Good point. Okay. Other thoughts? All right, then, and I'll clean all these up and get them to you. And in the meantime, if you have other priority thoughts, please send them to me. And again, the notion of is if this was a mathematical equation, if we added up all of these priorities, would it equal that ideal community that we spent the first several weeks on? So, but the next step, and probably the hardest for me, and the one that's going to be the one that it really, really gets translated, is what do we do next in terms of these priorities, prioritizing them, giving them strategies, making them more specific. Essentially, the document we'll send to City Council will rely on having those kind of things in it. And this is going to take us, I'm sure, several meetings. But Shannon, as you probably have heard, is now the project manager for the whole ClemsonNext. And one of her, I think, duties will be to tie all this together. There are lots of different committees. There's lots of different documents. There's lots of history. As she pointed out the other day, there's the whole staff that work for the city that all sort of going to be part of this plan. And I don't think that we really have, I certainly have not done a good job of looking at it that holistically and that comprehensively. And I think this next step is going to force us to do that. So having said that, I asked Shannon, and she fortunately agreed to sort of take over the reins at this point. And I know she already has some ideas about what is the next step then getting from these priorities to an action plan with outcomes that we can specifically say, these are the 5, 10, or whatever things we need to do. So Shannon, if you're okay with that, I'll just take notes and turn it to you.
Sounds great.
All right, thank you.
So I think our next steps, because as Fran talked about, I think a couple of weeks ago, the city had not adopted the ClemsonNext recommendations. So I think our next step is probably to put all of our recommendations together, have them presented to Planning Commission and City Council for them to adopt those. And then after that, or actually simultaneously while they're doing that, in the hopes that we're all on the same page and they are adopted, I think we can do a couple of things. One would be figure out how we want to prioritize these as a committee, so we can hand that to city staff and Planning Commission and City Council. So, and I think we could talk about how we want to prioritize these, but I don't know, in my experience, it's a little bit easier if then we're all given an individual chance to prioritize them on our own. So we could set up a Google survey or a doodle poll to do that. So it can be kind of anonymous, but we have a chance to talk about all of them, how we, maybe the criteria we want to think about prioritization, but then we're all able to give our own independent opinions and values through those polls. And then after that, I think the next step, once Planning Commission and City Council adopt the recommendations we send them, might be working with city staff somehow to figure out what those strategies are and to implement each of those things. So we can, that's something I'll be working on, is what is our strategy after the recommendations are adopted by Planning Commission and City Council. I have to have some more conversations before we get there. But how does that sound to everybody as next steps? Does that make sense?
Sounds good to me.
Shannon, will the other groups, are you overseeing or helping manage the other? Okay, so that would be sort of what they will do too, like their recommendations will be adopted simultaneously?
They won't all be simultaneously. It'll be as each group goes through the ClemsonNext white paper and decides which recommendations they want to move on to Planning Commission and Council. So it won't be all at the same time. So it'll be kind of an ongoing process throughout the spring and summer. So all the committees will not be at the same place at the same time. But the hope is, since I'm sitting in on all of the committees, I can take the concerns of the traffic and transit group and make sure that those are included in land use or in housing or wherever, and bring those back too, because what land use and housing and other groups, the university group, they might have ideas that come back and impact our strategies. I don't think there's anything that are going to change our recommendations or priorities, but they might have ideas that impact how we actually implement things once they're adopted. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, thanks.
Shannon, would you be a member of city staff?
I am I'm an outside consultant.
For how long?
Right now for 6 months.
Well, the thing that concerns me is that city staff has fires to fight every day.
Mm-hmm.
Who is going to stand back and watch over the long-term outcomes of all this?
Well, if you've looked at the ClemsonNext white paper, some of those strategies that are in there and recommendations that are in there deal with the city hiring people whose positions will be to forward this and keep this moving. So my job is kind of contained right now into let's get this adopted and let's start to come up with strategies. And one of those strategies is to hire people long-term.
Some of these things will be 1 to 3 year items. Some of these things are 5 to 10 year items, and some are longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not working on the 10 to 15 year items, which involves a lot of politics, et cetera, they'll never happen. That's my concern.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to put some strategies in place that keep these items so they're aligned in the comp plan, and we have some strategies for city staff to keep working through them and keep them on the radar. That's the goal.
Thank you.
So how do y'all feel if Fran and I kind of streamline all our recommendations that we would like to send to council, and send that out as a document? We can go through that next week, make sure it looks the way everybody wants it to look, and then we can send that to Planning Commission. How about some thumbs up or hands or
Sounds good.
something?
Sounds good.
Okay, just to make sure you're all still listening. All right. So that'll be our next step. DeWitt?
Why is it going to the planning commission rather than to city council?
I think we'd like to have Planning Commission and City Council all on record as adopting this. So I think it makes sense. That way, everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows where we're headed.
That's
To me,
a
that makes sense.
procedure. Yeah, okay.
So that would be our next step, and then to City Council. And so there will be opportunities if this committee wants to provide feedback or speak in support of these recommendations at Planning Commission or City Council when these are up there. So I will make sure everybody knows when these are on the agendas for those meetings. And while we're moving forward with that, I will move forward once we have those recommendations. We can work on prioritizing those.
So Shannon, just to sort of figure this out then. So do we want to send everybody on this committee the list of priorities maybe by Monday and have them prioritize them before next Friday's meeting, or talk about the list first at next Friday's meeting? And then if your idea about a poll, so how do you want to do that?
I think we can send out the list of recommendations by Monday.
Okay.
Everybody has time to look at those. And then Friday, we can discuss if there's any concerns with how the final wording of the recommendations look.
Okay.
And we can discuss what criteria people want to use for prioritizing them on Friday. And then the following week would be the poll. And then we might have a week or two where we're off waiting for Planning Commission and City Council for these to go before those meetings.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, so Shannon, I'll get you by the end of today what I think we agreed on the priorities, and then turn it to you to clean up and then get it out Monday, right?
Will do.
That's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. What else, Shannon?
That's all I have for this committee. I think, we have done a great job of moving through this process swiftly and listening to everybody's concerns and taking them in. So I think the next step after City Council adoption would be looking at strategies. And I think that's something that would be helpful if we have city staff involvement on. So I would take some time at that point. We talk to Chris, maybe we have Chris in engineering or city planning staff talk to us a little bit about each of those things and see where it makes sense for us to provide input and where it makes sense for them to provide the input. The how-to of how these things actually get accomplished. I mean, they have the how-to, it's already up there. So we could go to them for that instead of trying to engineer that on our own or make that up on our own.
Okay, good. I like that a lot. That's excellent. All right.
So does anybody else have?
Yeah.
No, that's all I have. We're good.
Okay. Everybody okay with this plan? Oh, I like it. Yeah, thumbs up. Ensley, thank you. Abigail, you're okay? Okay. All right. So we will, Renee is okay with this. Good. We will get you something Monday, and then next Friday, I like that. Next Friday, we'll sort of discuss it, make sure we stand. Even see if a poll is necessary. Maybe we have conversation that indicates where we lie anyway. And I like the idea of taking it to the count, yeah, because ultimately, you know, planning commissions can probably have to buy on this anyway. And then the city council, and then assuming that something happens there, in terms of approval, whatever, move ahead. Now, one question someone asked me yesterday, and I don't know that we need to talk about it, but just keep it in mind, is at what point do we start getting more public input, you know, public hearing, public meetings on this kind of thing, you know, like in our case, do we want that? I assume we probably do, you know, some public input the night of the council meeting, for instance, or do we want to have some kind of public hearings? And that goes for all the recommendations. And we are ahead of everybody else just because I think they launched us first. So maybe just be thinking about what, how, and when do we get more extensive public input, right? I mean, we're a representative group, but Shannon, has that come up in your conversations or thoughts about that? And not just for us, but all the groups.
Right. That's something we are working on and trying to decide if that's included in, so you guys have all seen the ClemsonNext plan, in the idea of doing charrettes for some of those catalyst areas, having transportation included in those, which I think it should be. But also trying to decide on, do we want to have separate transit and transportation kind of public meetings? One of my concerns is I don't want to wear everyone out with too many options for input. I think one of the things we will do is set up a standard kind of email box for everybody to send input to, and I'm working on a couple other ideas as well. So there will be ways for the public to provide input. It's just working out how to do that in a way where we don't overburden everyone.
Yeah.
It's such a big plan, and people have a lot of, I know we're very focused on one part of the plan, but the whole plan really affects everyone. So finding a way for people to give their input on all of the areas that they want to provide input on.
Yeah, that's going to be a key piece to this. So, all right. So hearing nothing else, we're going to finish early. Very nice. And then we'll reconvene next week and decide on priorities, decide next steps in terms of a poll or whatever. And then Shannon's right, we'll have to probably lay off a couple of weeks to let this go through the system and see where people stand on it without losing our enthusiasm, and then come back, right? All right, good. Any other comments? Brad, you okay with that?
Sounds great.
Yeah,
Good deal.
okay, good. Thank you again. That was excellent. And Shannon, I'll send you something about late this afternoon, probably. All right.
Sounds great, Fran.
Excellent. Thank you all. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.